Dean Paul Martin Jr. was his Rat Pack father's golden boy. This multi-talented athlete and artist could have outshone his famous father if he hadn't flown too close to the sun. Dean Paul Martin Jr. was the quintessential golden boy of his generation. Not only did he inherit his father's famous good looks and effortless coolness, but he also proved to be a star in his own right. He was a talented musician and actor, a high-achieving professional athlete, and even a fearless fighter jet pilot. Dean Martin Jr. entered the world as a Nepo baby on November 17, 1951. His birth name was Dino Paul Crocetti Jr., but it didn't take him long to adopt the name of his famous father, the legendary crooner and actor Dean Martin. He was his father's fifth child, but the first in his second marriage to the actress Jean Biguer. With that pedigree, Dean Martin Jr. was practically born with a spotlight on him. According to one of his friends, Martin was never afraid of his father's shadow. In fact, it might have been the reverse. From the time that he was young, he was too good at too many things. Not only was he a heartthrob, but he also had a winning combination of charm, talent, and connections that made him irresistible. Even his babysitters were Hollywood heartthrobs. For Martin, growing up in the entertainment world had its perks, including a revolving door of A-list family friends. While most households turned to the eager teenager next door for babysitting, Martin's babysitters only walked on red carpets and wore couture. Even as a toddler, he was bouncing on the knee of none other than Marilyn Monroe. Though Dean Martin Jr. grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth and tinsel in his veins, he was no slouch. In fact, he had a disciplined upbringing. He attended the Urban Military Academy in Brentwood, California, where he got a taste of hard work and hard knocks. But no amount of push-ups could drill the tinsel out of Martin. With a voice like his father's and enough charm to melt camera lenses, it was no surprise that Martin Sr. encouraged his son to pursue a music career. Unlike his father, however, he wouldn't have to claw his way to the top. He was already there. His teen years saw him take his musical ambitions to the big stage with a rat pack of rugrats of his own. At just 13 years old, Dean Martin Jr. formed the pop group Dino, Desi, and Billy alongside Desi Arnaz Jr. and Billy Hinch. It was his first foray into the spotlight on his own, and the band's early successes proved that he didn't need his dad's name to make waves or melt hearts. Of course, having his father's connections didn't hurt. Dean Martin Jr. wasn't the only member of the band Dino, Desi, and Billy with A-list Hollywood pedigree. The trio had met while still in grammar school, and thanks to the family connections of both Martin and Desi Arnaz Jr., their success was all but guaranteed. In fact, the band held its first audition for Frank Sinatra and signed it to his record label. Dino, Desi, and Billy got off to a big start. Shortly after signing with Sinatra's record label, they released singles like I'm a Fool and Not the Lovin' Kind. Both of their hit singles made it well into the top 40 in 1965, earning the young Martins some early success on the Billboard charts, but staying in the top 40 was not the same as getting there. Despite their initial success, Martin's band Dino, Desi, and Billy couldn't keep up the momentum. After their big hits in 1965, the group struggled to replicate the success and didn't see another top 40 hit in the 5 years that followed. Turns out that the spotlight and the scrutiny that comes with it could get too heated, even for a golden boy. Just because Martin and his bandmates had famous parents didn't mean that everyone bowed at their feet. In fact, Dino, Desi, and Billy never won over the critics. For example, critic Richie Unterberger from AllMusic once described them as having never had an ounce of credibility, and called their music innocuously bland in the extreme. While the critics weren't kind, Martin's band did have some famous fans, most notably the Beach Boys, one of the most influential groups of the 1960s, thought highly of Dino, Desi, and Billy. Brian Wilson even co-wrote one of their songs, Lady Love, with Billy Hinch, giving the group some serious musical credibility. By 1969, Dean Martin Jr. and his bandmates had grown into their late teens and out of love with their pop-infected musical style. Desi Arnaz Jr. went on to work with his mother Lucille Ball on her iconic TV show, and Billy Hinch decided to head off to college. With that, the Dino, Desi, and Billy era came to an end, and Martin was once again on the lookout for the next big thing, and he had big ambitions. Dean Martin Jr. wasn't just ambitious in his career, he was bold in his love too. According to Tina Sinatra, Frank Sinatra's daughter and one of Martin's close lifelong friends, Martin spotted the woman of his dreams when he was still a teen. Martin fell in love with the actress Olivia Hussey and made a shocking prediction. After watching her 1968's Romeo and Juliet, "I'm going to meet her one day," he declared, "and marry her." Before he could make good on that bold claim, Dean Martin Jr. tried his hand at being a professional athlete. After briefly attending UCLA, Martin became an NCAA tennis champion, proving his athletic prowess. However, his time in school was short-lived, and he dropped out after just 2 semesters. He was focused on a different kind of love. After racking up love on the tennis courts, Dean Martin Jr. flew all the way to Britain for a different kind of love, Olivia Hussey. Unfortunately for him, when he arrived in Britain and asked Hussey out on a date, she turned him down flat, but Martin wasn't one to give up easily. 1 year later, Hussey moved to California and she agreed to go out with him. He was still full of surprises. Martin's persistence eventually paid off. In 1971, Martin and Hussey tied the knot, making the beginning of a star-studded love story. He had fulfilled his teenage declaration, marrying the actress with whom he had fallen in love with on the screen. With the real-life Juliet by his side, he was ready to write his own love story, tragic as though it might be. Always one to surprise, Martin's charms extended to his famous friends. On one memorable occasion, Martin decided to surprise his then-girlfriend Olivia Hussey by bringing none other than the Bee Gees over for dinner. Hussey, not expecting to see one of the biggest musical acts in the world turn up to her porch, answered the door in her pajamas. Dean Martin Jr., ever the Romeo, wanted to make his marriage to Hussey special. The Hollywood couple got married on Hussey's birthday in 1971, ensuring that they could never forget their anniversary. While the start of their marriage was full of love and excitement, the fairy tale didn't last forever. There was trouble in paradise. During his marriage to Hussey, one of Martin's lifelong struggles became apparent. He was too good at so many things that he couldn't decide what he wanted to do. He dabbled in several athletic pursuits, including semi-professional football in Las Vegas and even car racing. However, his athletic ambitions always brought him back to his first love. Dean Martin Jr. didn't just play tennis for fun, he took his talent all the way to the pros. From 1975 to 1978, he competed in the qualifying rounds for both singles and doubles at Wimbledon, cementing his status as a serious athlete on the world stage. But while his hard-hitting forehands might not have nabbed him a trophy, he didn't walk away empty-handed. In a funny twist of events, Martin's athletic skills brought him right back to roots, Hollywood. In 1979, he landed a breakout role in the film Players, playing, what else, a professional tennis player. Starring alongside Ally McGraw, Martin brought his real-life experience to the silver screen. Despite the Hollywood glare, he never lost sight of his real ambitions. Even with a budding film career, Martin's commitment to tennis never wavered. When he agreed to star in Players, he had just one condition. The shooting schedule couldn't interfere with his participation in major tennis tournaments. Whether it was his last name or irresistible charm, Hollywood agreed to film on his terms. Much to Martin's chagrin, Players was kind of a box office dud, but being the golden boy, he emerged from the minor debacle even shinier than before. His performance earned him a Golden Globe nomination for New Star of the Year and gaggles of new fans. He may not, however, have earned his place in Hollywood all on his own. Martin might not have earned his role in Players just because of his tennis skills and winning smile. Before his breakout role, Martin had already dipped his toes into acting. In 1967, he had an uncredited role in the film Rough Night in Jericho alongside famous father Dean Martin. Whether he earned it all on his own or not, however, he was on his way to superstardom. Following Players, Dean Martin Jr. enjoyed mild success on the big screen. In 1985, however, he hit it big with a leading role in the television series Misfits of Science. The quirky, oddball sci-fi series pitted him alongside a young Courtney Cox and had a successful 16-episode run. You might say that Martin was beginning to fly high. One of Martin's many passions in life, apart from tennis, racing, football, music, acting, etc., was flying. In fact, his love for flying had taken off early, literally. He earned his pilot's license at the age of just 16, and flying became one of his lifelong passions. What started as a hobby would soon lead to a new chapter in his already multifaceted life. In 1980, Dean Martin Jr. made a decision that took him farther away from the stars of Tinseltown, but closer to the sun. He enlisted in the California Air National Guard, and by 1981, he had completed officer training and was commissioned as a second lieutenant with the U.S. Air Force. Unfortunately, his love life had already crashed and burned. In the late 1970s, though Martin's career continued to soar, his personal life hit some turbulence. In 1978, he and Olivia Hussey divorced after 7 years of marriage. They managed to keep the reasons for the split out of the news, but their once Hollywood perfect romance had clearly come to an end. Fortunately, Cupid still had wings. Unsurprisingly, given his patented genetic good looks and a winsome personality, Dean Martin Jr. didn't stay single for long, and his next pick might have been even more famous than he was. In 1982, he married the figure skater and Olympic gold medalist Dorothy Hamill in a ceremony that was as star-studded as it gets. Martin even wore his lieutenant uniform for the occasion, adding a touch of grandeur to the affair. It was a proud moment for one person in particular. Martin's career choices had taken him far from the world of entertainment, but he had his father's full support. At Martin's engagement party, Dean Martin proudly remarked, "I'd be proud even if he didn't become a jet pilot, because he's a good boy." But his closing statement foreshadowed trouble ahead. "He just doesn't know what he wants to be," Martin Sr. lamented. Decades after their glamorous wedding, Hamill still had nothing but kind words for Martin. In her memoir, she referred to him as the love of my life and described their relationship as a passionate love affair. Despite the depths of their love, however, there was still something between them that they couldn't overcome. Though they loved each other deeply, Hamill and Martin's marriage faced challenges. Hamill revealed in her book that they both had a lot of growing up to do, which was difficult while constantly traveling to different places for work. She admitted that their focus on their careers took a toll on their relationship, and they tried desperately to save it. As their marriage continued to deteriorate, Martin sought help from a psychiatrist, but it only revealed the real stressor in their marriage. Martin, the son of a celebrity, struggled with not having a career that allowed him to feel like the provider. The unstable dynamic created tension in their otherwise loving relationship. Sadly, he couldn't adjust to his role. In her memoirs, Hamill revealed some less than flattering facts about Martin during their eventual split. She explained that Martin walked out on her during the summertime, a season that was particularly tough for her as she battled depression when she wasn't able to skate. Martin's decision left her absolutely heartbroken. Martin's exit from her life left Hamill in a terrible position. She described being devastated, depressed, and sobbing for weeks after he left, lamenting the loss of not only her husband, but also her best friend. Despite their differences, she remembered Martin as the most incredibly funny, easygoing, talented man. Soon, a memory of him would be all she had. Even as Dean Martin Jr. continued to explore his acting career, flying remained one of his biggest passions. He advanced in his National Guard career, becoming a captain. Reflecting on his love for flying, Martin once said, "The high I get seeing the sun come up is so great that if I perish, it would have been worth it." Sadly, these words would soon take on a chilling significance. On March 21st, 1987, Dean Martin Jr. took to the skies with his co-pilot, Captain Ramon Ortiz. They were flying in an F-4C Phantom jet in what was supposed to be a routine training flight. Ominously, however, their mission took them over the San Bernardino Mountains in California. Dean Martin Jr. was piloting the aircraft when the weather suddenly turned treacherous. Without much warning, a fierce snowstorm descended over the skies, creating near-blind conditions for the multi-talented aviator. All of a sudden, their routine training flight turned into a perilous situation. As the storm raged in the skies, an Ontario airport controller tried to warn Martin to change his course. With the heavy snow completely blocking out his vision, he had no way of knowing that he was heading straight for a mountain. Sadly, Martin seemingly didn't hear the frantic message and flew further and further into danger. In a tragic turn of events, caught up in the winds and shifting pressures of the storm, Martin's jet suddenly plummeted 4,000 feet. Traveling at an astonishing speed of 400 miles per hour, the plane slammed into the side of Mount San Gorgonio, sealing the fate of both men on board. But it would be days before anyone confirmed the tragedy. Search helicopters and planes spent several tense days scouring the mountains for any sign of Martin's plane, yet came up with nothing. Meanwhile, Martin Sr. sat at home, frantically burning through one smoke after another, praying for the news that the search parties had found his son alive. His worst nightmare had come to life, and he felt the pain that his close friend Frank Sinatra knew all too well. It must have been nearly impossible for anyone to know what Martin's father was going through, but if someone did, it was Sinatra. A decade earlier, his mother had lost her life in a plane crash, eerily in the exact same area that Martin's plane had disappeared. Sinatra remained by Martin Sr.'s side as they anxiously waited for news. Martin Sr.'s daughter recalled Sinatra, voice shaking, saying, "If there's anything I can do, pal, anything at all." But despite his shared grief, there wasn't anything he could do. All they could do was wait for the phone to ring. When it finally did, Martin Sr. got the news he'd been fearing this whole time. Martin Sr. was willing to do anything to find his son, Dean Martin Jr. He even hired 2 psychics to help in the search. One touched Martin's flight suit and recoiled, saying that he was dead. The other pointed them towards San Gorgonio Mountain, the very same peak where Sinatra's mother had met her fate. 3 days after the plane went down, the search party approached the mountain and found what they had been looking for. Dean Martin Jr.'s aircraft lay demolished on the mountainside. There were no survivors. He was 35 years old, and the news devastated Dean Martin Sr. Dean Martin Jr.'s elaborate funeral reflected his Hollywood pedigree and status as a prince of Tinseltown. Fighter jets soared overhead in a traditional tribute, and over 200 people gathered to pay their respects to the fallen star. However, these weren't any ordinary guests. Martin's star-studded roster of friends and family turned out in force. The guest list at Martin's funeral was a who's who of Hollywood elite. Obviously, his father Dean Martin attended along with Rat Pack members Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. Other big names in attendance included Jerry Lewis, Lucille Ball, and Martin's old friend Desi Arnaz Jr., amongst other legendary figures. Then, Martin took his final bow. Even after his tragic and fiery accident, Dean Martin Jr.'s legacy continued to grow. Obviously, his athletic accomplishments still stood, but it was his on-screen accomplishments that truly outlived him. His last film, Backfire, premiered posthumously, only months after his crash, and gave audiences one last chance to bid farewell to their golden boy. Tragically, Martin's fatal accident occurred not long after he learned some personally devastating news. His ex-wife, Dorothy Hamill, had moved on with her life and remarried. Despite the sorrow that may have followed this news, Hamill later found solace in the fact that Martin was doing what he loved most when he passed on: flying. Dean Paul Martin had been the apple of his father's eye. Once rescue teams confirmed the Golden Boy's passing in the wreckage, Dean Martin Sr. was never truly the same. According to author William Keck, after the crash, the elder Martin became a shadow of his former self. He described it as like looking at a candle without a flame. In the book, Keck described Dean Martin Sr.'s final years as being filled with a quiet kind of sadness and longing for his son. Every evening, Keck reported, the grieving father would visit La Familia, his favorite Italian restaurant in Beverly Hills, where he sat alone, quietly twirling his pasta as he mourned the loss of his golden son. Despite his untimely demise, those close to Dean Martin Jr. marveled at how much he had managed to achieve in his short life. His friend, Morgan Mason, reflected that Martin had a life fuller than most people 100 years old. In that regard, Martin's passing took on a bittersweet taste as his loved ones imagined what more it could have been. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more.